Addison Burke knew well the taste of reheated coffee at 5 in the morning. It wasn't good, never was, but it was part of the ritual. That dark, bitter liquid kept her awake while the rest of the city still dreamed. She adjusted the badge hanging around her neck, watching the steam fog up the cafeteria window, and felt the familiar weight of the day ahead. Boston woke slowly that winter, but the halls of St. Matthew's never slept, and neither did she. There was something comforting about predictability. The sound of heart monitors echoing down the corridor, the smell of antiseptic mixed with stale coffee from the break room, the same tired voices switching shifts. Addison moved between beds and charts with a quiet efficiency, like someone dancing a choreography memorized for years. Gentle with each patient, attentive to every detail, she knew exactly what to do when someone needed her. The problem was that no one ever asked what she needed. And maybe it was better that way. Taking care of others was easier than facing the emptiness waiting for her at home. At the hospital, she had a purpose. Hands that held, words that soothed, gestures that saved. Out there, in the cold streets and empty apartments, Addison was just another hurried silhouette beneath Boston's fog. She touched the silver necklace around her neck, the broken heart hanging there like a reminder that some wounds never fully heal. Her mother's gift. The last thing left before the eternal silence. Tessa, her best friend and coworker, always said Addison hid behind her scrubs. "You take care of everyone but yourself," she'd tease while tossing her blonde hair back while biting into an apple in the break room. And maybe she was right. But what Tessa didn't understand was that caring was the only way Addison knew how to exist without falling apart. Each patient was a welcome distraction. Each emergency, a reason not to think about her own loneliness.
That early morning, though, something was different. Addison felt it. A subtle restlessness, as if her body knew something her mind hadn't grasped yet. She looked at the blue notebook in her scrub pocket, the one where she wrote thoughts she'd never share with anyone. "Is there someone out there who sees me beyond the uniform?" she'd scribbled the night before. The question hung in the air, unanswered, like so many others. The shift ended as always, exhausted, efficient, invisible. Addison changed in the locker room, threw her backpack over her shoulders, and walked toward the exit. Boston's cold hit her like a punch, sharp, relentless, real. She pulled her coat closer to her body and started down the deserted street, her footsteps echoing on the wet pavement. The sky was that undefined shade between night and morning, and she breathed deeply, feeling the icy air burn in her lungs. Another day, another routine, another... That's when she saw it. A small, hunched figure sitting alone on a park bench, shivering under the dim light of a street lamp. An elderly woman with disheveled white hair, wearing a coat far too thin for that cruel cold. Addison stopped. Instinct spoke louder, it always did. And as she approached that fragile silhouette, something inside her whispered that nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. Addison approached slowly, the way one approaches an injured bird, carefully enough not to startle, urgently enough not to arrive too late. The woman sat motionless, her hands trembling in her lap, her eyes lost somewhere only she could see. "Ma'am?" Addison called softly, kneeling in front of her. "Are you okay?" The answer came in a confused whisper. I don't know where I am." And in that moment, Addison recognized something familiar in that gaze. Not the person, but the emptiness. The same disorientation she'd seen so many times in the hospital corridors. Only here, beneath the cold of early morning, it seemed even more frightening. Without thinking twice, Addison took off her own scarf and wrapped it around the woman's shoulders. "I'm going to take you somewhere warm, okay? You're going to be fine." The lady smiled, a sweet, almost childlike smile, and murmured, "You're very kind. My son used to say that about me too." Addison helped her up, supporting her weight that felt far too light, and started walking toward the hospital. Each step was slow, measured, as if they were dancing a silent waltz down the empty street. The sound of wet shoes on the pavement echoed through the early morning, and Addison felt her heart tighten. She couldn't just walk by. She never could. When they reached St. Matthew's, the sound of the automatic doors opened like a promise of safety. Addison pushed a wheelchair to the entrance and settled the woman gently, covering her with a thermal blanket she grabbed from reception. "I need someone to evaluate this patient," she told the nurse on duty, who looked at her with that familiar expression, half admiration, half exhaustion. "Addison, your shift ended half an hour ago." "I know," she replied, not taking her eyes off the lady, "but she needs help now." And that's how, somewhere between the duty she'd already fulfilled and the compassion she couldn't contain, Addison decided to stay. The doctors confirmed what she'd already suspected: signs of early-stage dementia, dehydration, mild hyperthermia. The woman was admitted for observation, and Addison, even though she wasn't officially on duty, stayed by her side. She adjusted the pillows, checked her vitals, held her hand when she seemed frightened by the hospital noises. "What's your name?" Addison asked tenderly. "Josephine," the woman answered, squeezing back those calloused fingers. "Josephine Neal." There was something about that name, that voice, that gaze, something that made Addison feel this encounter wasn't a coincidence. It was connection.
The hours passed like minutes. Josephine told fragmented stories, memories that appeared and disappeared like waves on a beach. She spoke of a son who was too busy, of a big, empty house, of a love lost to time. "He works so much," she said, her eyes welling up. "Sometimes I think he's forgotten I'm still here." Addison listened to it all, absorbing each word as if they were sacred confessions. And deep down, she recognized in that pain something that also lived in her own chest: the fear of being forgotten, of becoming invisible to those who matter most. Caring was easy. Being cared for, that she never knew how to ask for. Tessa walked past the room and stopped at the door, crossing her arms with an ironic smile. "You never quit, do you? You could be home sleeping, but you're here holding a stranger's hand." Addison shrugged, not letting go of Josephine. "She's not a stranger. She's someone who needed me." Tessa sighed, shaking her head. "Ad, you have a huge heart. Just don't forget it needs care too." The words hung in the air, heavy as an inconvenient truth. But before Addison could respond, Josephine reached into the bag beside the bed and pulled out a crumpled card, extending it with trembling fingers. "Call him, please. He'll worry." Addison took the card and read the name engraved in gold letters: Bryson Neal, CEO, Neal Enterprises. The paper was expensive, the name imposing, the address in one of Boston's tallest towers. She swallowed hard, feeling a strange pang in her chest. Whoever this man was, he had power, money, influence. And a mother who was here, alone, lost in the early morning. Addison tucked the card into her pocket and looked at Josephine, who was already closing her eyes, finally at peace. Outside, the reception phone began to ring, insistent, urgent, inevitable. And Addison knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was only the beginning of something that would change everything.
Bryson Neal arrived like a contained storm. The sound of the automatic doors opened to reveal a tall figure, broad shoulders wrapped in an impeccable dark suit, his face marked by a tension that all the money in the world couldn't disguise. He held a bouquet of flowers, white lilies, already somewhat crushed in his hurry, and his eyes swept the hospital corridor with the urgency of someone accustomed to fixing everything immediately. But there, beneath the cold, unforgiving light of St. Matthew's, he was just another frightened son, and that disarmed him in a way no business meeting ever could. The receptionist pointed to the room, and Bryson crossed the corridor with firm strides, the sound of his leather shoes echoing like drumbeats. When he pushed open the slightly ajar door, what he saw made him stop. His mother slept peacefully, her white hair arranged on the pillow, her face serene for the first time in months. And beside her, sitting in an uncomfortable chair, was a young woman with brown hair pulled back in a messy bun, her scrubs stained with coffee, her eyes tired but attentive. She held Josephine's hand as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Bryson felt something tighten in his chest: gratitude, guilt, and something else he couldn't name in that instant. Addison raised her eyes and met his gaze. For a second, the world seemed to pause. She saw a man with a firm jaw and dark eyes, but she also saw the shadows beneath them, sleepless nights, worries that no executive assistant could resolve, and he saw in her something he rarely encountered: Authenticity. No forced smile, no automatic reverence upon realizing who he was, just a sincere expression, tired and incredibly human. "Are you her son?" Addison asked quietly, slowly releasing Josephine's hand so as not to wake her. Bryson nodded, unable to find words for a moment that seemed to stretch beyond reason. He entered the room, placed the flowers on the table, and finally spoke, his voice lower than he usually used in boardrooms. "How is she?" Addison stood up, adjusting her scrubs with an automatic gesture, and maintained a professional tone, but there was warmth there, a kindness that can't be learned from manuals. "She arrived dehydrated with signs of hypothermia. She's stable now, but she'll need follow-up care. The memory lapses are concerning." Bryson closed his eyes for a second, as if those words were physical blows. "I should have noticed," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "I should have been there." The guilt was palpable, heavy as lead, and Addison recognized it because she carried her own guilt too, wrapped in different shapes.
"Punishing yourself now won't help," she said firmly, but without harshness. "What matters is that you're here, and she's going to need you moving forward, present, not just on paper." The words came out before she could filter them, and for an instant, Addison regretted being so direct. After all, who was she to speak that way to a billionaire CEO? But Bryson didn't take offense. On the contrary, he looked at her with an intensity that made her take half a step back, as if those dark eyes could see beyond the scrubs, beyond the mask of competence she wore every day. "You're right," he admitted, his voice hoarse. "And I don't know how to thank you for what you did for her." Addison shrugged, looking away. "I was just doing my job." "No," Bryson countered, taking a step forward. "You did much more than that. You brought her here, stayed with her, took care of her as if she were your family." There was something breaking in that controlled voice, a crack opening in a facade that probably took years to build. Addison felt her heart tighten, but she maintained her distance, professional, safe, protected. "That's what I do," she answered simply. "I take care of people." But when their eyes met again, she realized there was an unspoken question hanging between them. And who takes care of you? Neither had the courage to say it aloud. Not yet. Josephine stirred in the bed, letting out a soft sigh, and both turned to her instinctively. Bryson approached, holding his mother's hand with a gentleness that contrasted with the power he radiated. "Hi, Mom," he whispered, his voice thick. Josephine opened her eyes slowly, confused for a moment, but then smiled, that sweet, hazy smile Addison already knew. "Bryson, you came." "Always," he promised, kissing her forehead. And as Addison watched that scene, something inside her stirred. A dangerous tenderness, a connection that shouldn't exist. She knew she needed to leave that room, return to routine, to the safety of professional distance. But when she turned to leave, his voice reached her like a delicate hook. "What's your name?" Addison stopped at the door, looked over her shoulder, and answered, "Addison Burke." And before she could regret it, she added something she never would have said under normal circumstances. "I'll come back tomorrow to see how she's doing." Bryson nodded, and for the first time in a long while, something that looked like hope shone in his eyes. "Me too."
Bryson kept his promise. The next day, he was there. And the next, always at the same time, always with something in his hands. Fresh flowers, a book his mother used to love, hot coffee in disposable cups that he brought for Addison without asking if she wanted it. "Thought you might need this," he'd say, extending the cup with a shy half-smile that seemed out of place on that face accustomed to commanding boardrooms. And Addison accepted, because refusing seemed stranger than simply saying thank you. But the truth was, she began to wait for that gesture, began to wait for him, and that scared her more than she was willing to admit. The conversation started simple. Updates about Josephine, medical guidance, small details about medication and care. But gradually, the words stretched longer, the silences became comfortable, and suddenly they were talking about things that had nothing to do with the hospital. Bryson spoke about the pressure of maintaining an empire built by his father, about endless meetings and decisions that affected thousands of people. "Sometimes I forget I'm human," he confessed one afternoon, his eyes fixed on his sleeping mother. "I forget there's something beyond the numbers and strategies." Addison listened with that unique attention only she knew how to offer, and responded with disarming honesty. "Maybe that's why you're here now, to remember." And something in those words hit him like a perfect arrow. She opened up too, slowly, like someone opening a door that had been locked for years. She talked about the mother she lost too young, about the silver necklace she carried like an amulet against loneliness, about the feeling of always living in emergency mode, taking care of everyone but herself. "It's easier that way," she admitted, fidgeting with the now cold coffee in her hands. "When you take care of others, you don't have to face what's missing in your own life." Bryson watched her in silence, and for the first time, Addison felt the weight of being truly seen. Not as the efficient nursing assistant, not as the kind woman from the hospital, but as Addison, with all the cracks, all the fears, all the imperfect beauty she hid beneath her uniform. And that was both liberating and terrifying. The afternoon sun streamed through the infirmary windows, creating golden stripes on the linoleum floor. Addison was adjusting Josephine's pillows when she felt Bryson's gaze resting on her. It wasn't the first time, but this time was different. She raised her eyes and found him smiling, a small but genuine smile that completely transformed that serious face. "What?" she asked, feeling her cheeks warm. "Nothing," he replied, but his voice carried something that contradicted the word. "It's just that you shine when you take care of people. It's almost impossible not to notice." Addison quickly looked away, her heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with the hectic shift or too much coffee. This was something else, something dangerous, something she didn't know if she wanted or could allow.
But Boston is a small city in certain circles, and hospitals are environments where nothing goes unnoticed. The looks began, discreet at first, then more obvious. Colleagues whispered when Addison passed by, and Tessa wasted no time confronting her. "Ad, you know everyone's talking, right? About you and the billionaire." Addison closed her locker harder than she intended. "Nothing's happening. I'm just taking care of his mother." Tessa raised an eyebrow, not at all convinced. "Oh, really? Then why do you smile every time he arrives? And why did you start wearing lipstick on your shifts?" The accusation, though wrapped in affection, hit Addison squarely. Because Tessa was right. Because something was happening. Yes, something that grew silently like a plant in fertile soil, roots deepening before the flowers even appeared on the surface. And then came Dr. Thomas Simmons. He called her into his office on a cold Thursday morning, his face impassive but his eyes severe. "Miss Burke, I need to have a serious conversation with you." Addison sat in the chair across from him, her hands sweaty, her heart stumbling. She knew. Of course she knew. "It has come to my attention that you've been maintaining an inappropriate relationship with a patient's family member." The words were clinical, but the judgment behind them was sharp as a scalpel. "It's not like that," Addison tried to explain, but he raised his hand, interrupting her. "It doesn't matter how you see it, Addison. It matters how it looks. And it looks like you crossed a line that can't be crossed." The room seemed to shrink, the air growing thin. She thought of Bryson, of the conversations, the smiles, that feeling of finally being understood. And she also thought of the career she'd built, the purpose that kept her standing, the fear of losing everything. Addison left that office with an ultimatum unspoken but perfectly clear. Keep your distance or pay the price. She walked through the corridors as if submerged, sounds muffled, vision blurred. When she reached Josephine's room, Bryson was already there, and his smile upon seeing her was like a stab and an embrace at the same time. "Hi," he said, his voice soft. "Brought you coffee." Addison looked at the extended cup, at this man who had unwittingly turned her world upside down, and felt something break inside her chest. She took the coffee, forced a smile, and murmured a thank you that sounded more like goodbye. Because sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes the weight of duty outweighs the desire of the heart. And as Josephine slept peacefully, oblivious to the emotional storm forming around her, Addison knew that a terrible choice was approaching, and that no matter what she decided, something or someone would inevitably be lost. Addison began avoiding him. Not obviously, she was too professional for that.
but in subtle ways that only someone paying attention would notice. She switched shifts when she knew he'd come, delegated Josephine's care to other nurses, looked away when she crossed paths with them in the corridor. And Bryson noticed. Of course he noticed. The confusion on his face was painful to see. That expression of someone who doesn't understand what they did wrong, who searches for answers in gazes that no longer meet. He tried a few times, stopped in front of her with words on the tip of his tongue, but Addison always had an excuse ready, always an urgency that took her away. And each time she turned her back, a piece of her died along with it. It was Tessa who confronted her, of course. She cornered Addison in the break room during a pause she didn't want to take. "You're running from him. Why?" Addison stirred her coffee with a plastic spoon, her eyes fixed on the dark liquid, as if all the answers she couldn't give were there. "Because I have to. Because it went too far. Because I can't lose everything I've built here because of..." Her voice failed, and Tessa completed with uncommon gentleness. "Because of love?" The word hung between them like a confession forced out. Addison didn't answer, but the tears that began to fall said everything she didn't have the courage to admit aloud. Tessa held her friend's hand, squeezing tightly. Sometimes we have to choose between what's right and what's safe, and they're not always the same thing." The situation worsened when the press found out. A blurry photo of Bryson entering the hospital with flowers, a speculative article about the mysterious romance of the billionaire CEO with a hospital employee. Nothing confirmed, everything insinuated, but enough to ignite a fire. St. Matthew's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters tried to enter the reception area, and Dr. Simmons was furious. Addison was called to his office again, but this time she wasn't alone. There were other board members, serious faces, accusing looks. "This is unacceptable, Miss Burke. You've brought negative publicity to this institution." The words were like stones, heavy and sharp. She wanted to defend herself, wanted to scream that she hadn't done anything wrong, that she'd only cared for someone who needed it. But what came out was only a broken whisper. "I'm sorry." When they offered her the chance to take a temporary leave, a polite euphemism for veiled suspension, Addison felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. There was the life she'd built, the purpose that kept her standing, the identity she wore like armor, and it was all crumbling because of something she hadn't even fully allowed to happen. She thought of Bryson, of the coffees brought without asking, of the conversations that warmed her chest, of the way he looked at her as if she were extraordinary. But she also thought of her career, of the badge she wore with pride, of the promise she made to her mother to never give up caring for others. And in that moment, sitting in that cold, impersonal room, Addison made the most difficult decision of her life. She handed her badge to Dr. Simmons, placed the blue notebook on the table, and whispered with a firm voice, despite the tears, "I'll take the leaf, and I'll step away from patient Josephine Neal." Leaving the hospital for the last time, at least for now, was like tearing off her own skin. Addison walked through corridors she knew by heart, past the infirmaries where she'd saved lives and held hands, and felt each step like a final goodbye. Colleagues looked at her with pity, some with judgment, others with silent understanding. Tessa caught up with her at the door, hugged her tightly, and whispered in her ear, "You're not wrong for feeling what you feel. You never were." But those words, as comforting as they were, couldn't fill the emptiness growing in Addison's chest. Outside, Boston's cold greeted her like a slap, and she pulled her coat closer to her body, walking aimlessly through streets that suddenly seemed strange and hostile. She didn't cry, not there, not yet, but she felt the weight of all the choices she'd made and all the ones she still had to make. The days that followed were a gray blur. Addison stayed home, staring at the empty walls of her apartment, trying to remember who she was before the hospital, before Josephine, before Bryson. But the truth was, she didn't know. Caring had become so much a part of her that without it, only a hollow shell remained. She leafed through the blue notebook, rereading old thoughts, and found a sentence she'd written weeks ago. What if caring too much about someone is just another way of running from myself? The question now had the weight of prophecy.
Her phone rang a few times, messages from Tessa, calls from unknown numbers she ignored. But there was one message she read and reread until she memorized it, until the words were engraved on her chest like scars. My mother was discharged. She's doing well, thanks to you. But I still need you. Please, give me the chance to explain. Bryson. Addison held the phone with trembling hands, her thumb hovering over the reply button. Part of her wanted to run to him, fall into arms that had never held her but that she had imagined so many times, confess that he was right, that she needed him too, that maybe taking care of each other was exactly what they both needed to finally become whole. But the other part, the scared part, the part that just lost everything, the part that still heard Dr. Simmons's voice echoing in her head, kept her from pressing that button. She set the phone aside, closed her eyes, and finally let the tears fall. Because sometimes love requires more courage than we have. Sometimes the heart weighs more than duty, but we're not always ready to carry that weight. And as night fell over Boston, Addison wondered if she'd ever find the strength to choose herself, to choose love, to choose the possibility of being cared for instead of always caring. The answer she didn't have yet, but something inside her whispered that Bryson wouldn't give up so easily, and that maybe, just maybe, this story hadn't reached its end yet.
2 weeks of silence. 2 weeks in which Addison tried to convince herself she'd made the right choice, that the distance was necessary, that the pain would eventually pass, like all the others. But this pain was different. It wasn't the sharp pain of sudden loss, but rather that dull, constant ache of someone who'd walked away from something still alive, still pulsing, still waiting. She woke every morning without the shift alarm, without the routine that defined her, and the feeling of being adrift was almost unbearable. The empty apartment echoed her footsteps, and the blue notebook remained closed because there were no words to describe the emptiness that had taken over everything. Until, on a cold Saturday morning, the doorbell rang, and everything changed. Addison opened the door, still in her pajamas, her hair messy, her eyes swollen from a poorly slept night, and found Bryson Neal standing there, hands in his coat pockets, his face tired but determined. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore a simple sweater, jeans, and there was a vulnerability in him she'd never seen before. For a long moment, neither said anything. They just looked at each other, and it was as if all the lost time, all the forced distance, all the shared pain materialized in the space between them. "You didn't answer my messages," Bryson said finally, his voice hoarse. "I know," Addison replied, her fingers gripping the door handle. "I didn't know what to say." He took a step forward but respected the distance. "Then let me talk first." Bryson told her everything, about how he went back to the hospital the next day and discovered she'd taken leave, about the guilt he consumed him when he realized he'd been the cause of her life's destruction, about the nights he lay awake trying to understand how to fix something he didn't even know he was breaking. "I tried to stay away," he confessed, his voice cracking at the edges. "I thought it would be better for you, that you could move on, go back to work, be happy without me complicating everything." He laughed without humor, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "But then I realized something. You taught me that caring for someone isn't weakness. You showed me there's courage in allowing yourself to feel, in allowing yourself to need someone. And I need you, Addison, not as my mother's nurse, but as you. As the woman who saw beyond the CEO, beyond the money, beyond everything I pretend to be. You saw me." Tears streamed down Addison's face before she even realized it. All the defenses she'd built, all the logical reasons she'd mentally listed to keep her distance, everything crumbled before that raw, honest confession. "Bryson, I lost my job because of you. I lost the only thing that made me feel like I had purpose. Like I mattered." He closed the distance between them, his hands finding her shoulders with a gentleness that contrasted with the power those hands carried. "You didn't lose anything. You're just discovering that your purpose is bigger than that hospital, bigger than that uniform. You matter, Addison.
not because of what you do, but because of who you are. And I came here because I learned from you that sometimes we need the courage to accept care too.
Addison looked into those dark eyes that saw her in a way no one else had, and something inside her gave way, not from weakness, but from choice. The choice to believe she deserved to be loved, that she deserved to be cared for, that she deserved something beyond the safe, predictable routine she'd built as a fortress. "I'm scared," she confessed, her voice small. "I'm scared this is too big, too fast. I'm scared of losing myself in it." Bryson smiled, that smile that transformed his entire face, and held her face between his hands with a tenderness that took the air from her lungs. "Then we'll meet in the middle. I'll learn to be present, you'll learn to allow yourself to be loved, and we'll discover together that taking care of each other isn't losing ourselves, it's finding ourselves in a way we never imagined possible." And then he kissed her, slowly, with all the care in the world, as if she were the most precious thing he'd ever held in his hands. And maybe she was. Addison felt the world spin, felt years of loneliness dissolving in that touch, felt the broken heart finally beginning to mend. When they pulled apart, breathless and smiling, Bryson took something from his pocket, a crumpled card, the same one Josephine had given her that first night. "My mother gave this back to me yesterday. She said she knew from the beginning that you were special, that you were going to change my life." And she was right. Addison laughed through tears, touching the card as if it were a sacred relic. "Is she doing well?" Bryson nodded. "She's home, with follow-up care. She asks about you every day. Says she misses the girl who held her hand when the world seemed too scary." They stood there, in the apartment doorway, embracing while the morning sun warmed Boston with a promise of spring that was still months away, but could already be felt in the air. Addison realized she'd spent so much time caring for others that she'd forgotten how good it felt to let someone care for her. And Bryson, who had spent years building empires and forgetting to build connections, finally understood that true power lay in allowing himself to be vulnerable, in allowing himself to love. "What do we do now?" Addison asked, her head resting on his chest, listening to his heart beating firm and steady. Bryson kissed the top of her head and whispered with a certainty that came from a deep, true place. "Now, we live. We take care of each other, every day, starting today." And for the first time in a long while, Addison believed she deserved exactly that. To be cared for, to be loved, to be chosen. Not despite her cracks, but because of all the imperfect beauty they revealed.
Just as Addison discovered that love can transform even the most guarded hearts, each of us also carries that power of healing and rebirth within ourselves. Her journey shows us that sometimes we need to lose control to find true connection, that taking care of ourselves isn't selfishness, but rather the purest form of courage. Stories like this remind us that it's never too late to open our hearts, to accept the affection offered to us, and to believe we deserve to be loved exactly as we are, with all our imperfections, fears, and unique beauty. Addison and Bryson teach us that true love doesn't happen despite difficulties, but through them. That vulnerability isn't weakness, but rather the bridge that connects us to each other in a genuine and profound way. And that sometimes the greatest act of love is allowing someone to care for us the same way we care for others. If this story touched your heart and awakened reflections about love and care in your own life, write in the comments, "Love transforms lives." Also share which moment of the story moved you the most. We want to know what touched your soul. Subscribe to Eternal Romance Stories and experience with each episode emotions that warm the soul and reflections that transform the heart. Here you'll find stories that celebrate love in all its forms, love that heals, love that challenges, love that makes us whole. And this was just one of the many stories that will still move you here, because where there is love, there is always a new story waiting to be told.